right. I think this is where we left off. Does that sound about right? Cool. Oh, we got past it. Fantastic. Alrighty, so we're going to talk minerals next. I know this is just like what you guys were dying to find out today. It's like, oh man, I can't wait to talk about Pete. It is awesome. Pete. He's a great guy. Waka waka waka. Yeah, it's type of gross. That's actually really accurate. All right, so here's what it is. It is vegetative mass that's been stuck in a swamp for billions of years, and it's petrified into a substance we can burn it like coal. Yummy. It's an energy resource. You see, during the Industrial Revolution, most of the coal found throughout Europe has been burned and used up. So they have to turn to alternative energy sources. That include fossil fuels like peat, as well as natural gas in some places. However, fossil fuels are much more expensive in Europe than they are here, to the tune of like $9 per gallon of gas. We think we've got it bad. So this means that they rely on other sources of energy, whether it be nuclear, natural gas, again, in most other places, hydroelectric power, and solar power, wind power in places where they can. So, you know, they basically use less than what we do. It's more efficient. In fact, if you look at automobiles, they have cars that are much more fuel efficient. They tend to be smaller, but they're not like smart cars small. I mean, they're littler. For instance, I actually drive a car that was made by Nissan originally for Europe as sort of a SUV type vehicle, and it gets like basically 30 miles to the gallon, which is pretty darn good for an SUV. I knew a guy who used to live there, and he was a contractor, and he specifically lived in around London, and he had a little like $2 car that he used like as a pickup truck, and he got like something like 50 miles to the gallon, which is just unbelievable. But that's how you have a car. If you afford it, you've got to have something that's more efficient. And other places deal with it in different ways, of course, but again, this also means more efficiency in a lot of cases. So again, they rely on different types of energy. As far as other minerals are concerned, the main thing is producing power for their economy to run efficiently, run smoothly. And power is a significant issue in terms of any economy. But whenever you rely on importing energy from other places, you're kind of susceptible to the market there. Fluctuations, so if like it costs more, well, that ends up making it more expensive for you to do business. So this is always a problem, energy usage and things like that. Not to mention efficiency. But that's what peat looks like, big blocks of it. It's pretty gross. But it's useful and relatively clean. Relative. But anyways, as far as climate's concerned, Western Europe is predominantly marine West Coast, which makes sense. It's on the West Coast and it's near an ocean. Now let's talk weather for just a second. What causes weather to happen? Sorry? Cold? What do you mean?
Like cold fronts, warm fronts.
Sure. The various fronts of weather. What do those represent, by the way? What is a cold front, really? Well, it can be. I mean, we get cold fronts, we get warm fronts, and this. I mean, what is it? It's heat. Yeah, it's air. Right, exactly. We're talking about wind, aren't we?
Yeah.
More or less. We could say air temperature, things like that, but for sake of argument, we're going to say wind and water. It's number one, that's the first cause, I should say, not the number one. That implies that it's more important than the others. When do water currents help to create weather? Again, this is really no big surprise if you've ever studied anything having to do with the Earth. But consider this. The sun hits more or less the same place on the Earth, and the rest of it gets less energy, accepting the fact that this heats water and heats air, which then moves to the process of convection, spreading that energy all around the Earth, which means it can greatly influence weather. Example of that. Back in the Middle Ages, there was a shift in the winds that caused unseasonably warm winds to continuously blow into northwestern Europe. It got so hot that in northern France, it was like theorized you could actually grow oranges, provided that they wanted to. To put another perspective, in England, they were growing vineyards for about 100 years until the winds reversed themselves. So it's kind of an interesting question how that whole thing works. Yeah.
So if they were growing the vineyards, would they grow oranges?
That's a specific vineyard. What about its place? Not really. But actually, well, yeah, it is actually. I think about it. It's I'm getting my song lyrics first. Beg pardon. It's from an old British sailor's song. Farewell to you, Spanish ladies. But there's an American version, which is where I'm getting the lyrics confused. But moving on, the other thing is that this is kind of what makes the difficulty of telling quite how much human beings have influenced weather, because frankly, we don't have that much history on it. We know we are influencing the climate. We know climate change is real. The question is how much. And situations like that kind of tend to throw even more of a bigger monkey wrench in the whole conundrum. But it is also kind of interesting to see how that works, as a factor of change. Another major effect in terms of weather is elevation. However, we'll write this as physical geography. We talked about the rain shadow effect. I need to write and not talk. I can't do both at the same time today. Physical geography. So, for instance, mountains greatly impact the way that winds can move. So that, in some cases, shields certain areas. In other cases, it acts to stir up winds and redistribute them. For instance, the Alps, which is the largest mountain range in Europe, redistributes these energies coming from the Atlantic Gulf Stream, otherwise known as the Atlantic Jet Stream, which is these warm winds coming off of the Atlantic. So that causes it to redistribute to other places of Europe, which keeps it actually warmer than it should be based upon the third criteria, which is latitude. Again, if I pull down the map here, and we were to look at Europe, again, we're talking like Paris, France, that's on line with Canada. Go up to London, start getting up to higher latitudes. Go away to Norway, things like that, it's pretty darn cold. So situationally, it can actually have warmer climates because of that. It doesn't always. But the other thing is we're going to see in the southern part, its proximity to the equator keeps it warmer there, which creates the Mediterranean climate we're also familiar with as well. However, they can also create unseasonable winds that are not normal. And in particular, there's a series of warm winds called fogs, which can greatly influence the weather throughout this area. I realize this is probably the least interesting thing in the world right now, talking about weather. But it actually is kind of important because climate directly influences how we as human beings interact with our environments and the type of lifestyles that we live. Europe, being of a nice temperate climate, being with a very fertile soil, meant that this area was one of the first areas settled when the migrations throughout this area really kind of got going. It was settled because it was so good as land, and that's significant. Furthermore, it's one of those things that human beings just kind of like to talk about. That's if you have nothing else to talk about, it means I'm going to talk about the weather. Although you're really not supposed to, apparently. It's one of those faux pas. Politics, religion, weather, you don't talk about it. But anyways. So, that's good? Got this?
No.
Why not? It's only 2 sentences. It is. Be they longish sentences. Actually, that's one thing I want to talk to you guys about. Is I have heard throughout my entire academic career, and I'm sure you have too, that whenever the teacher writes something on the board, you should write it down word for word. I'm assuming you've heard that before. Yeah. Anything a teacher puts up on the board, you should write down. That's never right. Here's the problem with that. If I write something down like that, or this over here, you know, I can only write so fast, especially with my horrific handwriting. So if I was writing all the notes out, yeah, that's a sound piece of advice, because I can only go as fast as I can write, so you're going to be able to keep up. But I'm not writing down everything. Most of everything I have is on PowerPoint, isn't it? So I can have giant walls of text that you have no prayer of writing everything down. Especially if I'm just like going, if I don't wait around for you guys, you know what I mean? The thing is that I'm probably just going to wait for you guys, but later on you'll find professors don't care, they just keep going. Some professors will put up walls of text, some will not put up anything, they just talk to you. You know. So what I am encouraging you to do, and what you're going to be learning to do over the next couple of years, is how to eliminate all the unnecessary words. For instance, let's look at the first bullet. The weather of Europe is largely affected by the ocean, such as the Atlantic Gulf Stream, as well as by elevation. So what we can do is bullet weather underneath that hyphen, Atlantic Gulf Stream, under that elevation, that's it. That says the exact same thing. It's just eliminating words like the, of, is, such, as, the words that you really don't need to know to identify what it is we're talking about. You can go into a little bit more detail. For instance, I don't remember what the Atlantic Gulf Stream is. Well, you put that as a wind pattern coming off the Atlantic Ocean. You know, stuff like that. This is just one of those things you'll learn. It's pretty handy. Yeah. Question?
I was going to say, my teacher, my old school, my history teacher, he didn't do notes or anything, he just sat in his chair and talked all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of had to work on how to make notes and stuff.
Sure. Well, that's actually pretty useful, even though it's a trial by fire. But yeah, that's pretty common, I find, for college professors. They never write anything down. Now I've heard in other departments like in math and science, it's right for your life. They just go. You're just like trying to keep up. But I've never had that experience. I will say I did take one science course, and like the dude, he had like walls of text, but he just said, just buy this notebook. Like he put together all of his PowerPoints just like this and would like eliminate like a word here, a word there, so you had to pay attention. And you could buy it for like $6 and it was all the notes for the entire class. Like you just fill the blanks. So I didn't really have to deal too much. Anywho, but this shows the transatlantic Gulf Stream, and again bringing the different temperature winds in throughout. Now a couple things. You guys remember what that is, right? The timberline. It's the point where you basically don't have trees growing. Okay, that's important. Avalanches. You guys know what those are, I presume. What causes them? Yeah.
Around those services in the ground.
Can. Disturbances on the ground is a little bit more up to speed. Although that's not usually what causes avalanches. Yeah. Heat. Case in point, have you ever been inside a car in the winter and you've got like that sheet of ice and you turn on the blower so it warms up the glass and it kind of melts and then it slides off? It's basically what's happening when foams blow through. Now, in a lot of cases, it can also just be caused by too much weight. Because basically snow builds up and builds up and builds up and eventually there's an avalanche on its own as gravity pulls it down. That's why there's actually ways of trying to prevent them by having controlled avalanches. You don't let them build too big. We'll use dynamite and things like that to cause them to fall. They actually had this episode of Mythbusters where they were testing the sound thing, and they had all these really loud things like machine guns and guitars and anything they could come up with to try to cause an avalanche, and nothing did. And so they're kind of like, man, this is kind of a bummer. So they use these bits of dynamite out of a little air cannon and they created little avalanches. The thing is, though, they're also incredibly dangerous for a couple of different reasons. One, the amount of weight. Two, the speed. They go around over 65 miles per hour, and it's kind of an unexpected nature. And they can blow over cars, they can blow up houses, things like that. So basically, preventative maintenance is necessary. It's actually not uncommon from what people do up north too, because like they get tons and tons of snow. Like even like northern Chicago, it's not uncommon for them to get like 4 foot of snow, things like that. And so what happens is the snow builds up on roofs and things like that. And you'll see guys take a snow shovel and climb up to the top of the roof and shovel their roofs. Because if they let it build up, eventually the weight will be such that it'll crash the rafters down and take the roof out, crush the house essentially. So in particularly bad weather, things like that. From my experience, they also don't ever what I call school for snow days. It's like they never do. You guys probably won't have to worry about it with this class, but I've got a plan if we ever have a snow day. Because we got YouTube. Basically, the class will resume very normally just online. Now that being said, because I'm not answering questions, it'll be like super quick. It'll be like, 10-minute video covering everything. That's kind of how we're going to run. So, Southern Europe, mostly Mediterranean. Go figure. It's because most of the Mediterranean Sea down there. In fact, depending on some areas in the climate, they have different types of buildings that take advantage of different aspects of the weather. Now, it tends to be hotter than a lot of other places in Europe. Also tends to be drier during the summer, which seems a little strange when you think about it being on an ocean. That's the way the winds blow. Again, these various factors contribute. This also means, though, that in the South, life takes on a slightly different pace. Like, how many guys have heard of the siesta? What is a siesta? Yeah, that's what most people tend to think about. But nap is really not a good explanation of it, because you certainly could take a nap. But what it is a period of day where you just slow down. You just relax, maybe have a cool drink, get some shade, talk with friends, because in places where it gets really hot, like you see this tradition all throughout Africa, in the Middle East, Mexico, Spain. It's better to just take part of the day and chill out and relax and just let the weather do its thing. And then when it gets cooler, you resume your day. It's not uncommon also for there to be changes in how people go about their days. So, for instance, in Italy, school lunch isn't at school. Like, you go home and have lunch and then go back to school. Now, what about distance? Well, keep in mind, most of Europe is pretty urban. Most everyone lives in cities. So it's like you walk a couple blocks and you're there. So it's not like you have to drive for 20, 30 minutes, things like that. The other thing is the oh, yeah, it's having like a different meal schedule, because generally speaking, Americans eat 3 meals a day. In Europe, a lot of places they do 4. You guys have tea time? Tea? Like tea? Just think of the English drinking the tea thing for that. That's actually a meal. It's a small meal. It's like more like a snack. But the way it works is this. If you think about it, you get up around 6 o'clock. You might have breakfast around 6:37, something like that. Go about your day. Most folks eat lunch around 11. Most folks eat dinner around 6:30. We take the distance between those different hours. Between 7 and 11 is 4 hours. Yeah? Between 11 and 6 is 7 hours. Yes? It's nearly double. So you put a little snack in between that, so you just balance that out. You don't have these crazy hankering to stuff your face when it comes around dinner time. The other thing is, eating-wise, and this tends to shock people, in Europe, their food tends to be much higher in fat than American food, which seems a little peculiar because we think of Americans as being all fatty and things like that. First of all, you guys know America is not the fattest country in the world, yes? Last I checked, that was Mexico. Yeah, it's been a couple of, but the thing is, a lot of these places, their economy sort of balanced out, and now they can afford to be fat. They can afford fast food. So that's one thing. But the other thing is our problem isn't the fat, our problem is the portions. Like, for instance, there's a French type of steak that's cooked by basically frying it in butter, is more or less how it's made. And you might make that, and it's a 4-ounce steak. You know, the United States, like, we're going to have a 12-ounce steak, like 3 times bigger, you know? So, and it's just a little bit different. They also have a different attitude about different kinds of foods. Like, for instance, we tend to guilt ourselves a little bit about desserts, things like that. They really don't. It's like, oh, this is fun. Those have a much smaller portion, but it's super rich by comparison. Also, alcohol, they don't really see it like we do. They're not like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to drink, turn 21, you have to party. They don't do that. It's just a type of drink there. It's like getting really, really excited about orange juice. You know, like, for instance, in Oktoberfest, you'll see now there's all these ideas of beer gardens and things in the United States where basically old men go and drink and, you know, have a party here and basically get hammered, and that's, you know, fun. In Germany, that's not what a beer garden is at all. In Germany, a beer garden is sort of like a coffee shop. It's a place you go with a friend maybe in the afternoon, or like in between, you know, like taking a coffee break. Like, it's like, I'm going to go to work, but I'm going to go have a beer real quick with your coworker, and it's literally out in this nice little outside place, and it's part of German culture. Also, another thing I thought was funny about Germany is, you know how we serve bread? You know, in restaurants, we get the basket of bread, they do pretzels. Delicious pretzels. Yeah, sorry, you had a question, Colin? It depends on the place. Different places have different drinking games, essentially. I will say, though, that in international waters, it's wherever you're from. So it's kind of surreal whenever I went on a cruise with my mom and dad back when I was in high school and seeing these British ladies who are my brother and I's age just drinking wine at dinner. It was like, what? And like, you know, for them it's no big deal. It's just like whatever. It's just, you know, everyone does it. They don't have really the same kind of issues we do. If that makes sense. Yeah.
It's like noticing you have like alcoholism.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's separate from our culture. Does that make sense? That's a whole other bag of worms. They absolutely do. Although they don't have like problems with like alcohol abuse like we do. If that makes sense. It's like people go out and have fun and things like that. They party, but it's not like as crazy as it is here. That makes sense. It's like they don't have a team drinking problem like we do. So it's just a cultural thing. We'll get to more of that later, but you know, that's all kind of tied to the climate. For instance, we talk about wines and things like that. Well, where's wine country in Europe for the most part? What do we think about what countries? Well,
Italy.
Italy's a big one, sure. Maybe not thinking Greece, but Greece is one as well. France is the other. And these areas are all in Mediterranean climates. These type of plants, called chaparral, are just incredibly well suited for growing in this area. And again, it was just a way of carrying this fruit energy, with some sugars in a way that would not go bad. You can dry fruits, you can put them in all kinds of things like that, but it'll still go bad eventually. You can, however, make alcohol out of it and it'll last for, in some cases, centuries. It's well preserved. So it's a food preservation thing. We don't really think about that way. But yeah. Another thing I think is kind of interesting as an aside is we have this obsession with pasta, which because pasta is delicious and all. The thing is, pasta is not a meal in Italy. Like, it's a side dish. It's part of the meal. We just tend to think, well, we're going to eat just this. Like, it was funny, my parents went to Italy one time, that their dad retired, and they're like, having this dinner at this, Italian restaurant in Italy, and so they're like bringing out this pasta, they're just stuffing themselves with pasta, and they're like, people are kind of chuckling, it's like Americans and things like that, and they're like, fantastic. That's the first course. We're bringing out the second one, and they're like, what? They bring out like all this other stuff and like steak and wine, things like that. It was like, I was so sick. It was unbelievably sick. Because he just kept eating. Because it's delicious and amazing and what you do. There are worse things in life than getting sick on food. Like getting sick on food. Alright. Mr. Soccer. So we're going to stop there. Call that good. So I'm going to shut off the recorder.
Six slides to go.